I'm not particularly good, well, at a great number of things, but I'm not particularly good at waiting, especially if it involves waiting in line. That's something that's a struggle for me. If I go to the grocery store and I load up my cart and then I get to the checkout lane and I see that each lane is 5 or 6 people deep, then my face just falls. I don't quite cry, but I come pretty close. I remember, in fact, on one occasion, it wasn't at a grocery store, it was a different store. I had gone and gotten the things that I wanted. There were 4 or 5 items. I got to the checkout lane, and it was too long for me. So literally, I went back, I put the things where they belonged, and I left. So, we all have that experience of waiting, and some of us can handle it graciously, and some of us less so. But it's a universal human experience. Whether we're waiting in line at the store, whether we're waiting in an office for an appointment, in a doctor's or dentist's office. We might be waiting for a friend to stop by whom we haven't seen for a while, for a spouse, for a child to come home after school, after work. We know that experience. And that experience can have different effects on us. Jesus alludes to 2 of them. Sometimes waiting can actually be very exciting, energizing. That's the sort of waiting that he alludes to in the first part of the gospel, as he speaks of being alert and oriented and ready to welcome the master when he comes back. That's the kind of waiting that we experience when we might be looking forward to, a new movie that's about to come out, or a new book that's about to be released. Someone who, again, is coming to visit whom we haven't seen for a while. We're excited. The anticipation builds, and it enhances the event when it comes to fruition. It makes it even better, assuming we're not disappointed. But then there's also that kind of waiting where it just becomes an exercise in drudgery, in tedium. That's the second type of waiting, where we wonder if what we're waiting for will ever actually happen. I remember several years ago when I was in an airport waiting to board my plane, and a notice came up on the screen, half-hour delay. Okay, that's not that bad. Then about 20 minutes later, another half-hour delay. And then another half-hour delay. And ultimately ended up being about 5 hours before we were able to board the plane. That was not the sort of waiting that made me excited. When it came time, it was just kind of a finally experience, born out of frustration. Jesus encourages us today to cultivate that first type of waiting. The scriptures challenge us to recognize waiting as a sacred thing, as a holy experience. Because when we wait for the Lord, something remarkable happens. When we wait for him, we start to grow attentive to all of the many ways he comes to us. Yes, we're certainly waiting for him to come in his glory at the end of time, to reveal the fullness of his salvation for us. We're waiting for that, absolutely. But as we wait for that, as we look towards that moment, we also start to recognize how he comes to us in so many little ways in the course of a day. When you're waiting for someone to show up at your doorstep, a lot of the memories and the experiences that you shared with that person that you might not have thought about, they come flooding back, don't they? So when we're actively waiting for Jesus, we start to recognize how he's already touched us in so many and varied ways. When we recognize that waiting is, again, a holy and a sacred experience, if we choose to make it so. We can let it be an experience of drudgery and toil, but we can also choose to be like the good servants in the gospel. We can choose to be like those figures in our first 2 readings, those ancestors of whom the book of wisdom speaks, who were waiting for centuries in Egypt to be freed. But they knew that God was as good as his word, and so their waiting was holy. Abraham in the second reading, who waited for God to fulfill his promise, who waited and knew that God would do so, and God did. Can we practice the art of sacred waiting? Certainly, here at St. John Vianney, you've had that opportunity for the past month, as you've kind of waited to hear news about a new pastor. And I hope none of you have anything sharp or heavy to throw at me, because I can say that you'll have that opportunity yet for a few more months. This past week, there was a meeting between the leadership of the parish and also some of the leadership figures of the diocese. And just because of various circumstances, it turns out that the bishop will not be able to assign a pastor, more than likely for a few months. And so, yes, this is a great challenge, by all means. I'm not trying to say it's not. But it's also an opportunity to recognize how even in this time, without a pastor, it's a chance to see how Christ is present and is at work. There's more information that you'll find in an insert in the bulletin. And throughout the next few months, we do have coverage that will be provided on the weekends. You'll get me for one more weekend, but not until October. So you've got a little decompression time this time around. And in the meantime, Father Peter Klein, who is pastor in Blue Earth, will be the administrator. He'll be kind of taking care of a lot of the oversight that might be necessary. And Marcia Stenzel, who works at the diocese as the superintendent of schools, will also be working carefully with the parish as the new school year begins very soon. So, as the notice in the bulletin says, the diocese has certainly not forgotten the parish. More importantly, Christ has not forgotten the parish. He's here. He's in your midst. He's present, even as he calls you to wait and to enter into a holy waiting, because he has something tremendous to share. And when the time is right, he'll bring it. He's as good as his word. He never fails. Even Christ himself had to wait. His entire life was journeying towards his passion, his death, his resurrection, and on the night before he died, he said to his apostles, "How I have longed for this." He knows what it is to wait. And he knows what it is to struggle. As he reached that moment of sharing a meal with his disciples, reached horrible death, and reached his Father's glory as he was lifted up. God wants to pour forth his glory upon all of us. And as we wait, we have the opportunity to stretch our hearts, to recognize how he's already coming to us and preparing us for something that's even greater than we can possibly imagine. It's a challenge to wait. It definitely is. No doubt about that. It's also an opportunity to stretch our faith, to let the Lord lead us, and to let him prepare us to receive something tremendous that only he could ever come up with.